Hey there, thanks for joining me. This is another stream where we're going to look at one of the latest HSE prosecutions. I wasn't sure if we'd already started there for a second, but clearly we're up and running. So yes, this is another review of one of the prosecutions which went through court in the UK. And this one looks at, if I'll get it up on screen for you now, hopefully you'll be able to see it. Okay, so if you look up on the top corner there, you can see a bedding manufacturer was recently fined £250,000 after two serious injuries from two separate incidents at their factory. So we're going to have a wee look at that and discuss what type of things we can learn. But first of all, let's look at exactly what has actually happened there in this case. Let me just remove that for a second. So first of all, in the first incident, the person and the worker that was involved was trying to perform a cleaning operation on what was called a measuring wheel as part of a cutting machine, a cutting apparatus. So imagine the cutting machine was cutting materials of some type related to bedding materials that were being manufactured. Unfortunately, the person climbed onto the conveyor. It must have been a moving conveyor of some type on the system itself or on the machine itself. And the key thing here was that the person didn't isolate. In other words, the person didn't isolate the machine from the power source that actually provides its power. So the power was still going to the machine. So in other words, it was still in operation in a sense and still liable to move and do what it's meant to do. So as the person went in to perform the cleaning operation, the machine did move. The detail on it is just that the clamp or as part of the cutting machine that holds material came down, and as the person was trying to clean the wheel and trap the person's hand, and the circular saw that is part of the cutting machine to actually cut the material came down and came into contact with the worker's hand. In this incident, the worker was actually quite fortunate because there appeared to be another employee close by that happened to either hear or see what was going on, or perhaps they were working alongside him. They were able to jump in and hit the emergency stop button. So let me just throw up the image here of that machine just to give you a little bit of context. Hopefully this works. Okay, so you should see up in the top corner here just the image of the type of cutting machine that we're dealing with here. You can see actually on the machine itself there that we have the yellow and red emergency stop. This looks also like an isolation switch. So typically, if you were doing this in the correct way, you would isolate the power either from that point or a point upstream from it to make sure that the machine can't operate, and therefore limiting the risk of any injury related to that. So yes, the person was able to come across, hit that emergency stop button to help the affected person. But unfortunately, the person who was doing the cleaning did get hit with the saw and lost 3 of their fingers. So it was a life-changing injury, albeit they may have been slightly lucky in some sense that the e-stop was hit. But it's a good example of what can happen when you don't isolate the machines from their power source and you try and perform that type of maintenance activity. So the second case then, slightly similar. Let me just look at the detail of that, and we'll throw up an image of the equipment that was involved. So this was what's called a quilting machine. It's not something I've really worked a lot with myself personally, but this type of equipment, conveyor belts, moving parts, it's all very similar to a lot of stuff we would see in many of the engineering shops and workplaces we would work in. And so what happened in this one, slightly different context. One of the casings from part of the machine itself had apparently slipped down the back of the machine. So as you can imagine, maybe a bit of vibration on the machine a loose screw or two, the casing has fallen off for whatever reason, and the worker trying to do the right thing has thought, I'll reach down or get into the back of the machine to retrieve it, put it back on. But again, unfortunately, the worker hasn't been aware that, to do that, the safe way would have been to use a lockout or isolation process to depower the machine before doing that. So what happened in this case, similar to the other one, the person's hand got caught up in the machine. In this case, they had safety gloves on, it seems, and the glove actually got tangled in the moving parts. And that's another thing that we have to stay aware of sometimes, is that the clothing and often PPE can be a contributing factor in terms of being pulled into a machine in certain contexts. But in this case, the person's hand got trapped and there wasn't any sort of e-stop used, from what we can gather, in the same way that of the last one. They may have got their hand out, but they ended up getting the top of 3 fingers amputated. So again, very serious injury, life-changing injuries here on both accounts in the one factory. And just to make a point, we're not here to pick on particular companies or anything like that, or obviously people who have been involved in these accidents, and that's why I don't mention names of anyone or any business here. It's really just hopefully a learning process, and hopefully you find value in me taking a quick look at these. So these 2 accidents quite similar in what happened to a degree, and the sort of root causes, what we would say. In terms of lessons then, so 3 lessons as usual, and the 3 things that I picked out here. Again, there's many different things that you could come up with in terms of lessons for these types of accidents, and it's not these are certainly not the 3 top priority or anything like that, but just 3 that sprung to mind from my experience. So first of all, it's just making sure that your employees and workers are educated on the risks of working with hard equipment and live equipment and machinery. So things that might look innocuous, like a conveyor belt or a roller or something that's moving, may look like it couldn't do much harm. But of course, as you can see in the examples, if you do get trapped by one of these pieces of equipment, the amount of energy and power that draws you in, and then the crushing potential of them is often and usually very severe, and there's nothing to stop the machine to keep moving in a lot of circumstances, depending on the safety mechanisms that are in place. So the question is, do the employees know the risks? In these 2 examples, there certainly looks to be a bit of a lapse, or even a culture of maybe not knowing or not paying attention to the risks. So what I would say is, show your employees examples of what can happen, and hopefully this video even could be a toolbox talk or something that can be shared and used, and that's part of the reason why we do this as well, for you to share this information. So get that education and that awareness and discussion amongst employees, and also by doing that, hopefully they'll be able to raise risks and things that they have seen and been aware of, that they're working around, maybe things that you don't know about. Okay, so second of all, and this one hopefully is maybe obvious, the isolation of the machine on both accounts didn't occur. So the power source wasn't cut off, and there was no isolation, what we would often refer to as LOTO, so lockout tagout. That's usually the isolation procedure that we would often use to make things safe. So one of the big things is that I often come across is, and we'll come to it in the final point, make sure you have an isolation procedure for any work that is being done. Has that been established? Do the employees know about it? If it doesn't exist, get onto it and make sure that it is put in place and it's formalized. Just to reiterate on that point, if you have to do certain things with the equipment while it's still powered up, there should be a safe system of work in place. If there are risks like being pulled in the machine, crushing, pinching, any of that sort of thing, if you're putting people at risk, there should be a safe way to obviously carry out those activities and processes whilst the machine is still powered up. The third thing then, and last thing, is And this is something to take away and hopefully something to share. These examples I thought was a really good example of what can happen as a hidden risk and things that you don't know about. So, for example, the casing falling down the back of the machine, that's a bit of an oddball one, something you wouldn't necessarily think about. And the other scenario was much more common. So it was a cleaning operation that the guy was doing. The fact that he was doing that when the machine was powered up would suggest that that is done on a frequent basis, perhaps, and it's normalized within the business even. So the question becomes, what type of things are the operators of the equipment on your site, with who you're managing, etc.? What sort of maintenance activities are they having to do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that aren't maybe obvious and that sit outside of the normal process and production process that's related to the equipment? Often these things are very much hidden or not obvious, and a lot of the time people don't consider them when they're doing risk assessments. So that's a question I would ask. It takes engagement with the operators, with the area supervisors that are looking after the equipment and the processes. Really get to understand what maintenance is required here. Sometimes you'll have maintenance that's done by external parties that are competent and trained, hopefully, but also your operators on the production lines usually have smaller tasks or odd tasks that they do every now and again. So you have to ask, like in this case, what are they? Are they doing them safely? Are there isolation procedures in place to make sure they're not putting themselves at risk, and so on? Okay, so that's a really important question to ask, and usually you'll uncover a lot of hidden things that you don't know about if you dig into that area a bit. So hopefully that was helpful for you. Do let me know if you're finding value in these. I do have the YouTube comments up and running here on the chat. So let me just turn that on. If you can drop a comment into the chat box there, if you're watching live, please do, so we can check that that's working okay. Also, thanks for watching. Thanks for letting us know if you're getting value for these. If you do have any questions, please drop them in the comments as well, and we'll keep rattling these out. And hopefully, as I was saying earlier, if you want to use these as a toolbox talk, or even for your managers and supervisors as a means to start getting a discussion around some of these safety topics, then absolutely please do use them and share them, and hopefully it's valuable to you. All right, thanks for watching this one. Hopefully we'll see you again next